Aloha, everyone, and thank you for joining the Moana Nui podcast. We're so excited for you to be with us on this special episode today. We're going to dive in to Am I Hawaiian Enough? This is a conversation that tends to be within the community because, along with other communities, there's this invisible standard for the people within the community to find out, hey, am I Black enough? Am I Hispanic enough? And even for Hawaiians, we are like, am I Hawaiian enough? Because especially those that live or grow up in the diaspora, to make sure, are we Hawaiian enough? So with that, I am going to bring our special guest, Miss Multi-level, multi-advocate. This woman is like, me meeting her for the first time, she put new fire in my spirit. And of those who know and those who've been a part of the show, if you can fire me and Moana up more than we already are, that just knows how amazing you are as a person. So I would like to welcome the CEO of Papaolalaki, Miss Sheri Daniels. Welcome, Sheri.
Aloha. How are you guys? Great seeing you. Seems like I just saw you guys.
Exactly. It was so great seeing you this past week. Of course, it was way too short, but I'm so glad that the three of us, were all in the same place that we could see each other and talk and really continue to expound ideas of how we're going to take Moana Nui podcast to the next level over the next years. So excited for you to be part of this conversation we're having today. Of course, we're going to kick things off of Sheri, what is your definition of Hawaiian or being Hawaiian?
So I just gotta share this. Moana and I were talking about just things to talk about. And I think we all struggle with what it means to be Hawaiian. I think we put our own spin on what that means, whether we look at how people look. Are you the dark Hawaiian? Are you the light Hawaiian? So I think the way you look plays a role in that. Your name, if you grew up with English names, or if you had the 5-syllable Hawaiian name that some people have, right? So name, I think the things that you do to demonstrate your Hawaiianness, I think for me, yeah, those may or may not matter. I think I do believe for myself, being Hawaiian or what the definition of Hawaiian is more than that, more than the things that you see. It's the way you behave. It's the actions that you decide to do when put to something, right? The ability to think beyond yourself, that it is never about you singularly, that there's always a collective factor to the things that you do, the actions you take, the things that you say. And so I think that definition is more than just the physical aspect of what that descriptor is. It's all about also what you carry yourself in. The understanding that you may not check those boxes, but you bring value to your community, that you have a place in that space of being a Kanaka, that you do belong. I think oftentimes maybe our families, maybe our communities, maybe the larger society really puts a lot of baggage on us on what that means and how we need to perpetuate or behave as a Kanaka. But I think there's some definite core values, right? I think growing up, there was real core values about how you treated people, how you treated your kupuna, the value you placed on trusting what it means to be Hawaiian. If no feel right, if something is stirring in your na'au, you listen. I think we oftentimes in this society now, it doesn't fit the parameters, right? It's not tangible. It's not something that I can quantify. And it often sounds very foo-foo. Oh, that's bullcrap. Like, how you know that? But it's really taking to heart those values and really applying them in your life. I think oftentimes as Hawaiians, it's really hard. It's a struggle because what I value and what I need to stand really firm in may not be really the norm, right? And so you often become the one that's maybe stands alone. Not that others don't value that, but it's also what you're willing to stand firm about and in. And so I think that's, for me, the definition of Hawaiian is that you stand in your truth, you stand in who you are, you recognize you have your ancestors and your kupuna behind you that have led that path ahead, and that you're there for the collective of the lahui, not just yourself and your own growth, right? But you grow, but your gain is also everyone's gain. So I think that's, for me, an epiphany or that what I see as Hawaiian is that they're so giving, so gracious, so genuine and authentic. And I think about my grandparents and my grandfather, especially, just not a bad bone in their body. And you often hear the saying like, don't see my weakness, or don't see my graciousness or my kindness as a sign of weakness, right? That oftentimes as Hawaiians, we're so giving and so gracious that people feel like, oh yeah, we go pull one over because can. And that's not, right? That's not really what it is. It's you're giving space so that you're being open to others and the spaces that others need as well. So that was a long-winded way of, but that's Hawaiian too, right? We take the journey. You take the journey and you go everywhere. I hope that makes sense for folks.
Yes, it really does. So for you, what does Hawaiian enough mean to you personally?
Okay. And I'm sure other people listening to this podcast or thinking about it, thinking of your own space. And I think there's a lot of spaces where we don't feel like we're enough, right? That whole imposter syndrome. And I think for me, what I thought of Hawaiian Enough has changed over the last 10, 20 years. In that, I think if I was in my 20s, the value of what it meant to be Hawaiian Enough is that I could dance hula. I could get up and kanikapila, grab the ukulele and just sing and be able to do that. Maybe olelo, maybe look more Hawaiian. But I think now in my life, Hawaiian Enough is, maybe that's not even what it is. It's just, I'm Hawaiian. That I shouldn't have to validate that for anyone. That I think we are in spaces already that we have to prove our space, and maybe we don't need to. But that's, I think, a personal journey, right? That because I don't olelo as well as my kids, am I not Hawaiian enough? But I think I am, because I support that decision and I uplift them to be able to olelo, to be able to appreciate those things in their life and what makes them Hawaiian and what is core to who they are. And that works for them. Our family that lives in Arizona, they have a very different life experience of what it means to be what Hawaiian means, right? That they don't have the same experiences that I have had or that my husband has had or my kids have had. And I think there's different grades of what that means for people and our own life experiences. I think if you were raised in a community that it didn't matter if you supported our community, if you loved us as much as we loved you, that was enough to be Hawaiian. And so I think our different life experiences play a huge role in what that is. And the desires and the motivations that we bring to the table. I think in the last podcast, I had shared that in elementary school. So my elementary school was really not a lot of Hawaiians went there. And so I think for me, there was this, what is being Hawaiian even about? What does that mean? What does it mean to be Hawaiian? Because it wasn't so out there. There wasn't a lot of influence around that. So I think now with this generation, the 20-year-olds, the early 30s and younger, this better understanding, having more pride in what that means is very different from my generation, even my parents' generation and my grandparents. And so I think that's where really looking at where you fall on that and your own life experiences to that, I think play a big role. So I think for me, yes, I have times that I don't feel like I'm Hawaiian enough. I feel like I did not have the ability to have a punana leo or kaiapuni education experience. I did have the Kamehameha experience, which is great, but it's very different. And so sometimes I feel like I'm a different Hawaiian than others, right? So even in our community, I feel like I have a different place than maybe other Hawaiians. And I don't know if it's about privilege. And I think when I say privilege, some people might be like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? And I think privilege is more than just I have money or I have money to do things. To me, privilege means you have opportunities that maybe others don't recognize, aren't able to access. So to me, privilege is about opportunity. Yes, it includes money and education and absolutely, but it comes down to opportunities at the end of the day and choices alongside opportunity. Because I could have opportunity floating around me all the time, but if I don't choose to pull that lever of opportunity, whether the outcome is good or bad, that's a choice. And so I think that's also really important when we talk about this sense of, am I Hawaiian enough? Do you come with privilege? And privilege meaning opportunities that others may not have had or won't have because of circumstances, because of choices, because of all these other things. And I think to recognize that and be really aware of that, because I think sometimes when you have access and opportunity, you take it for granted that everybody has the same. Or you take it for granted that you go, no, I'm really being a good Hawaiian. I'm giving Moana space. I'm giving Dana you space. But that's not, because when I turn around and walk away, Moana, you and Dane, both of you are still there. The opportunities are not the same. And so I think really recognizing that and owning that and being okay and not feeling, I think sometimes we feel guilty that, right? Like we have opportunities that others don't. But I think part of being Hawaiian and having that, the values of Kanaka is that we make sure, okay, this can sound kind of goofy, Lilo over there. You don't leave people behind. You don't leave people behind. You give them opportunities, right? You give them the same opportunities. You give them the chance to step up, to uplift, because that's the thing, right? As time goes on, you got to be able to step aside to let the others continue to lead the path forward. And that's a hard space, because who doesn't like the recognition? Who doesn't like the perceived power? All of these things. But I think it's also that you got to be self-reflective and honest about that how you uplift and how you do those things are really important. And it's intentional. I know for myself, I get up every morning and it's really intentional on the decisions I make and the words I use and the choices I make, because you only get one shot at it. And people, they don't remember when you're being a good Hawaiian, but they remember when you're being a pilau Hawaiian. And I think that's my biggest thing. I don't want to be known as the pilau Hawaiian. And our community is very forgiving. They are. They're very forgiving. But I don't ever want to put my community in a place, or my ohana or myself in a place where that me being Hawaiian becomes the reason why, right? Because we get enough of that. Oh yeah, that's because they're Hawaiian. That's why they're doing this, or that's why they using drugs or incarcerated, or right. It's all of those, but we never put as much energy in uplifting the positive.
Yeah, Sheri, I like how you mentioned about privilege because this is what I think and reflect on all the time, especially when you talk about access and opportunities. I pay attention to conversations in different spaces. And I would say there are outsiders who say that our community complains a lot. And I would say that any community can complain a lot, especially if you're online, because that's the culture, right? So while I do think some people do complain a lot, there is different access and opportunities that are either accessible or not. I think the part that breaks my heart is when I see Kanaka, or just not even just Kanaka, people who have lots of potential, but who don't have the right voices supporting them to be brave to be one, to be ready for the opportunities, and two, to step forward and take them and take advantage of them. Not take advantage in a bad way, but step into your role, your kuleana. And then I also think about, so when we was talking earlier about like the definition of Hawaiian, a lot of it is connected to our kupuna. We talked a little bit about that piece. So for those I know living in the diaspora, that access is not the same as one who's living at home, especially if you don't know your kuhau, but also just like your own physical environment, right? The community is disparate, right? Like we're not all concentrated in a place. And there's the types of things that you take for granted, but when it's gone, you say, oh, this is different. How do I adapt to this? Yeah. So I like that you brought up those things. Also about imposter syndrome. That is one that Dana and I have talked about this. We've had a couple segments on this. And I think for me, like I'm always reflecting on what does this even mean for me. And before, I think you have to know your roots. Like that's part of the whole thing. Because if you don't, it's so easy for other people to talk down to you, to trick you into thinking that you're not enough, right? I think the more that I have gotten to know my connection and I see who my kupuna were, then I'm just like, oh, then why am I even letting these people talk? Look at what I came from. How do I not honor them if I don't step up into my own kuleana, right? And that looks different for everybody. Nobody needs to be the person out in the front. You're like, not everybody gonna have the same role, but how can you for yourself personally identify your kuleana and what you can contribute to the collective? Because to me, that is what is Hawaiian, right? Like everybody having their space, their place, and doing their part. A'ohe nui ke aluia. No task is too big if everybody does their part. To me, I think that is a big part of what is Hawaiian.
It's interesting because you touched upon a couple things. Yes, we are often we're known as the Ku'e group. It's about activism, right? And I gotta temper that a little bit. Yes, but it's also about the ability to gain clarity and are like amazing, yes, orators, but debaters. And debating doesn't mean somebody has to be right. It's never about that. It is about how do I push the other to increase my knowledge, to push my understanding beyond what's right in front of me. But what happens is we're always highlighted in these spaces in being passionate. And right, when we look at all these modern day challenges of our community, we talk about water rights, we're talking about sacred spaces, we're talking about EV, we're talking about all these things. It's passion-driven topics. You're talking about the bones of our kupuna. You're talking about our source of where we hold space, mana, all of those things that are very interwoven in our lives. Whether you are tapped into that or not, there is that understanding. And when you look at some of the spaces of where people catch us, maybe not at our best, when you step back and you go, yeah, but the passion that they have around this topic shows that there is some value. But we get so fixated, or folks get so fixated on the ku'e, on all of those things, versus about look at the passion and the power that this community has around this area. So I always look at it that we're amazing debaters and we don't debate enough. We don't ever have space given to really just debate. For me and you to go in, Moana, and just hash out the crap. We don't. And what happens is we have to hash out our crap in front of the community or in front of the TV screens or in front of this. And then that just validates, when you think about colonization, that just validates, oh yeah, see, look, that's why we got to rein these Hawaiians in, because they're all over the place. And it's no. If given the opportunity to really talk through some of these things, very different outcome. The other thing is, oftentimes people somehow have this belief that they become the singular voice or the voice box for all Hawaiians. And I don't know anyone who has been chosen to be the voice box for the 600,000 plus Kanaka that occupy the U.S., Alaska, and Hawaii. And I don't know who would want that kuleana, because that's some major kuleana. And so I think that's the other thing, is somehow folks think that you Hawaiian, you're answering for all Hawaiians. And that is so not true. I think you will have not just generationally different viewpoints. I think you also have, like you said, a person's connection to their own ohana and their understanding of their mo'okuauha, very important. But I also think what also plays a role is people's willingness to just listen. Just their willingness to listen to the stories of our kupuna, to just soak in all the storytelling that you hear. We don't do that enough. And it's all of those factors that kind of mush into this ball of stuff that we keep trying to untangle. It's like a big ball of yarn, right? That we're trying to untangle and it keeps getting knotted. Or it's a koko, or when people tie cordage, and the hihia, the knotting of those things. All of those stuff, I think, is very relative to the things we're talking about today.
Yes. And Sheri, like you tapped into about people feeling like they're not Hawaiian enough, and you even had those moments. I can even say I had those moments because of other people's expectations or assumptions of what Hawaiians should be based on what they've seen on TV. So can you talk about when you had an instance of when you felt like you weren't Hawaiian enough?
Oh, that's pretty common. It is. So I think I shared last time on the podcast that my children are all products of Punana Leo and Kaiapuni. My two oldest had graduated from Kula Kaiapuni o Ke Kaulike on Maui. And they olelo, they have that part. My husband olelos quite a bit as well. I understand, I can read, I can speak. I recognize for myself, and I understand, practice, use it all the time. But it is not a comfortable space for me to use my olelo as openly, as willingly, as easily as others may. And so I think there's always that. If I could get past that little barrier, wow. But over the years, I've realized that does not define me, that I'm never going to get past people's assumptions because my kids speak, you should speak, or feeling guilty that my kids speak and I'm not responding in olelo. Somehow that makes me a bad parent. So that was me getting past that and me recognizing that, and I don't have to prove anything to anybody. Like Moana, like you said, you know who you are. I don't need to showboat that, because there's other things I can do for our lahui. There is other spaces that I can be in that are just as valuable and just as needed. And I'm still going to be a learner. I'm still going to be a lifelong learner, right? I'm still going to support Hawaiian immersion education. So I'm going to put the skills that I have to uplift those spaces that I know are important. And so I think that's what I've had to reconcile with, that I don't have to be such a prolific or proficient speaker, that I can be okay in what I'm comfortable in. And I can uplift those that they are awesome at it. And yes, we're going to need those. Like Moana, like you said, we're going to need all the types of folks in our lahui. That's what makes us rich. That's what makes us vai is that we have all these things. We're going to need the burger flipper as much as we're going to need the doctor, as much as we're going to need the lawyer. And I think having that sense of it being okay, for those of listening in who know my husband does not look Hawaiian at all. He's blonde hair, blue eyes. And till this day, I have seen really good intentioned people. Really, we'd be with our family, returning our rent-a-car on a neighbor island. And the auntie behind the counter looks at me. He's hearing my husband talk to our kids in Olelo and goes, "Oh, you're so lucky your husband learned the language. I'm Hawaiian. I don't even know how to speak. You're so lucky." And I thought, do I correct her? Do I just let it go? And I didn't, because that is common. For me, I get really a little, why? We should just be happy that, you know what, it doesn't matter what people look like. The fact that they are perpetuating a practice for our lahui, that our language doesn't go extinct. And so I've had these conversations with him around, does that bother you? And I think at some point, yeah, it did. And as we've gotten older, I think you recognize it for what it is, and they don't know any better. And not that there was any ill intention behind it. She was actually like, awesome job. You can do that. He can do that. And then I think, oh, that makes me realize that Hawaiians come in all shapes and sizes and colors and everything, right? That you don't even know anymore who is and who isn't. But again, that's a cultural value. You're not going to treat anybody different just because you think they might not be, right? You're going to be the same regardless. And if they're not, hey, congratulations that you're able to uphold a practice or this traditional piece for us, for our community, that you're helping to perpetuate. So I think there's a way you can look at it without making it so junk, because get enough junk stuff for our people that we got to really look at how we we change the narrative. So it is really about abundance and uplifting versus the narrative of disparities, because that's not productive for us.
Yes, exactly. So, Sheri, what are your thoughts on non-Kanakas who have provided value to our communities, your maneo?
So I think we have some really great examples of non-Kanaka, right? Folks like Puakea Nogomeyer, we have non-Kanaka who demonstrate on the daily their commitment to our lahui. And the thing I really respect about some of these individuals and I don't want to call them Kanaka, but I'm going to call them Kanaka, is that they stayed right at the front. They're okay. They embrace that they are not Hawaiian, but that doesn't stop them from showing up and being present for our people. And that is their commitment. And it's not anything that they gain from it. It's not this self-serving elevation for them. It's truly about uplifting the collective, the lahui in general. And I think we got to have that. When we look back in our kingdom, we had non-Kanaka that were very clearly committed to the kingdom and to the monarch, right? That they knew that they were subjects of the queen of our kingdom. They knew that. But it wasn't so polarizing as sometimes it is today, because they were all in there for the collective good. And so for me, I think there are definitely places for non-Hawaiians to be part and bring value to our community. And maybe that's the word, right? If you're going to bring value, awesome. If you're going to suck value and you're going to be a mana sucker, I don't know somebody coined that already, but if you're going to be a mana sucker, we have no time for that. That's very different from you adding value. You're a value add. We like that. Come, bring that and help us learn, help us improve, because we don't like to be mana suckers either. And so I think that is really looking at the value that they provide to our people. Yeah, no time for mana suckers. So Lealoha gonna use that term now.
Yes. Love it. Love it. So earlier you mentioned about grades of Hawaiian. What is your manano on grades of Hawaiian? Is it a thing for you? Like you mentioned about not being active in Oleo, but can understand, can speak, but your family is more in immersion. What is your views on those grades of Hawaiian?
I think you have to recognize where you are. So I think sometimes I am, depending on the topic, depending on what's happening in our community, I might be really to one end in really pushing having rights to our water, to those practices. There might be something that really drives my passion around cultural healing practices. That might be my area, or language, immersion language. That might be something that really pushes the range of what I get involved in. But I would think most times I am probably more centered around that. The other thing is I don't dance hula. Oh, I did, but it's really uncomfortable when you like the tall kid in the back. And so you stand out like a sore thumb, and then it just looks awkward. You don't have the real pretty long hair. I think those kinds of experiences stay with you. And no matter how much I really go, gosh, I wish I could. I picture myself as that awkward, gawky. Yeah, no, it's not the image that I see myself on during Merry Monarch, right? That is not the vision. But I'm okay with that. And I think it's because I'm comfortable at what I can do and what maybe I'm not as good at. Not that I can't do. It's just I'm maybe not at the level that I'd want. Because you know what? I'm sure there's somebody somewhere, if I did a little dance of ulupalakua or that kind of stuff, they would be totally blown away and think I'm just like awesome possum here. But right, it's also the audience. It's also the audience, because what you are accustomed to shades your world. And I'm going to give an example. My kids, we were we put my kids in like summer programs, spring break programs, things like that. And my older child was in there and his brother was in the audience with us. And they're providing an opportunity for students that really maybe don't have exposure to language, to Olelo, as my kids have had. And like anybody who's just hearing this for 1 week, you don't know. The comfort level is not there. And I remember my son telling me like, oh, my ears hurt. And I was like, what? And it wasn't until talking further with him, they were so accustomed to what they grew up in and what they were exposed to that it was just very different. And I think that's also really important as Kanaka, that my worldview, my lived experience may look very different from yours, Dana, or yours, Moana. Doesn't make it any better, worse, nothing. It just adds to the fabric of who we are as Kanaka. Think about our ali'i, right? Our ali'i would send people out into the world to navigate these different countries, these different communities, and gather and learn and be immersed and come back and bring all that ike and all that richness with them, because our ali'i knew that there was a world beyond our islands. And if we had to engage with that, be aware of it, that this was opportunities to improve us. And I think that's really important, that sometimes we look at the deficit or we go, oh my gosh, I'm not that great. And it's, you know what, you're pretty darn fabulous where you are. The thing you got to do is surround yourself with others that fill in the pukas around you, so that now what you're looking at is this amazing fabric of all of this stuff. And that's also cultural. That's also very Kanaka way of thinking, that I recognize where I am and where my limits and where I can, and then I bring everybody else around and into. supporting their space and what they're good at. But then I gain too, because I get to learn, I get to be exposed, I get to vibe off that energy as well in a way that also uplifts them, right? So it's that, to me, it's also an exchange of mana, a reciprocation of mana, that we all come with mana that we come with, and then there's mana that we gain. But I think when there's more of that mana going around, that we amplify. Like, how awesome is that? So yeah, I think we definitely have grades of Hawaiian. I think when we were talking, there's that, okay, I don't want to offend anybody. So I'm going to disclaim this. There's what we call the coconut Hawaiian, the Oreo Hawaiian, right? We've all heard that. But I think that's a grade, right? That's a grade that we go and have that. That's in any community. That sometimes you get people that look what you think Hawaiian should be, but they act not even close. But then you got to stop and wonder, what is their lived experience? What was their exposure to culture and to that? And sometimes I know our Kanaka that live away from Hawaii often struggle with that, especially as each generation goes, right? When we talk with our Hawaiians on the continent, we often hear the story of when that first generation moved up or made the choice for whatever reason, that they always made the effort to come home, to come visit, to come and stay connected. But really by the third generation, we're seeing that's a little harder to do because, right, the first generation, the aunties, uncles, that is still there. But by the second generation, we hear stories of it's really hard for them to connect what mom or dad talked about because they didn't grow up there. So connection to Tutu's house or auntie's house really becomes a different experience. And so by the third generation, it's even harder to keep that connection. It's not fault of anyone. It's just when it's not constantly in your space, it's really hard. And then and at what point does it become this reach to keep those memories alive? And we have it too, right? Even folks that live in Hawaii with development, with just the changing times, all of that, what we knew growing up has changed. But that's even amplified, I think, or more so for those that move away, because it's not a week apart from seeing, I never drive down Moana. I'm sure for you, I never drive Kilauea in like months. I didn't even know that would change. When you're coming, oh my gosh, I haven't been there in 10 years. Holy smokes, right? The transformation is so much greater. And so that makes it harder for us to hold on to that because it's just harder. And our own lives, we get focused in on what's happening on the day-to-day, wherever we're at. And so it's all those factors that I think play into this grade of Hawaiian. And so I think you recognizing where you are and being okay with it, that, you know what, I am a third generation diaspora Hawaiian, and I am learning what that means. I trying to better understand my ancestors, my genealogy, and all of that. And I think that's what is more important than anything else, is owning that. Because I still live in the house in which I grew up on Maui. I have that opportunity and that space. But I'm also 50 years old. I don't feel comfortable dancing hula in front of a crowd, nor do I feel comfortable playing ukulele and all of those things. And so I think it's owning what you have and owning what you maybe not as good at, but you have friends who can fill in the gaps.
Yeah, I think that's really important because it is true what you were saying, Sheri. I am someone who grew up in Hawaii, and every time I go home, it's like, what the heck is this? What is going on?
Yeah.
And for me and my sister, we really try to bring her keiki home every year so that they have some connection, right? But it is hard when you don't spend as much time in a space. And I also think it's funny because my cousins now, they're like, oh, you holler already. Like, we'll go to some of our kids' swimming spots and like, I'm not by the ocean anymore. So I'm not as strong of a swimmer anymore. we jump in and I'm like, oh my God, when did this used to be like second nature. And now I'm like, oh, can I breathe? What is going on?
And you're like struggling to get out of the water. You're like, oh my gosh, you lost your footing too. You can't even walk in sand.
Exactly. It's harder like in the river water because it's like, oh my God, you don't even want to, the mud is slippery. It is all the environmental stuff that you forget about. Yeah, so I think about those memories and my cousin just make fun of me. And I'm like, hey, shut up. I've been away for a while.
And it's not like you riding bike. It doesn't come back. Like it's,
No.
and I think that's the hard thing for many of our folks is, oh, I never realized walking rocks at the beach is so sore. Like when did that change? And I live in Hawaii and I'm like, when did that change? Oh my God, my feet is like super sensitive these days. Maybe it's age. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Too funny.
What's different from the first podcast is we had all kind of questions the last time around.
Yeah.
I don't know if people are like embarrassed to ask, but I hope people ask questions.
Yeah, if anybody has questions.
Here, I put it in the comments. I was like, you can engage in the comments, ask your questions, but I'm seeing more is listening and taking it in. Of course, as Sheri said, if you have a question, don't be shy. We will ask your question for you. It's not like it's like Zoom that we unmute you and then you have to come on and say it. Put it in the comments. We will definitely ask your question. And but I like the fact that you talk about that because people to see the different layers of being Kanaka in Hawaii, and especially as many of us that is here in the diaspora, being on the continent and all, because what you were just talking about, I'll go through that is I go to the islands ever so often because most of my immediate family is here on the continent now. And so there's no real, unless there's something major that happens for me to come to the islands and stuff. I have my son that's never seen the islands. Me, the last time I went, like you said, walking, I was just like, when did it feel this way? I don't remember walking on stuff here that my feet hurt, my feet are sensitive and things like that. And as you realize you've adapted to where you are now and you have to readjust. It's like I said, getting on the bicycle. It may be a little tough after you ever rode on it for a while, but you get right back in that rhythm once you are immersed in it again. I love that part of the conversation and everything. Let's see. Looks like we have here that if we haven't spoke on this, she said, many times Kanaka are questioned by our Kanaka in Hawaii as to if we are Kanaka enough. We are put into a space where we are now mainland Hawaiians. What does this mean?
Okay, this is my 2 cents. Take it or leave it. To me, the real big factor is Hawaiian is just not I woke up today and I decided I want to really understand a culture and I'm going to thumb through a book and I find Hawaiians and oh my goodness, I want to learn more about them and oh, I'm going to become Hawaiian. We are very fortunate that we don't have that we have koko. But I think, Lei, to your question, how do we navigate this? How do we not be hesitant or shame? And I think it's okay to say, oh, when I woke up this morning, I was Hawaiian. I was Kanaka. Nothing changed that. And I would be okay in saying, what makes me not Hawaiian? I still get koko. What is your interpretation of Hawaiian? Because if the interpretation is you got to be the little n and be 50%, good luck with that. Number is quickly dwindling down. I think it's also posing the question back. So Lei, I think I talked about it, right? When I think of our people, we're very great having the conversations, debating, having those spaces of dialogue. You might piss some people off, but part of it is they better think about what they're saying. because you only like one layer removed about knowing somebody close to you who now lives on the continent. So sometimes we gotta be mindful about when we say those things, like, I know your cousin now live down the street from me, right? I can see you being like, your cousin lived down the street from me. Are they not Hawaiian anymore? And I think that's the good thing is, as Hawaiians, we have koko. So unless things dissipate, evaporate out of your system or off your pores, you still have it. It's also what you choose to validate for them and asking them, what is Hawaiian to you? Because I get the koko and I don't know what else I'm missing. We cannot quantify how, and so Lei, I'm not sure if that was something that, and I don't think it's about, I think it's not rude. I don't think you're being a jerk. I think you're putting it back on them for their own self-reflection. And the message can come across just as, you don't have to come across sassy pants or anything. You can just say, this is what I thought. And okay. And we can agree to disagree. If their philosophy is really different than yours, then you just go, okay, hikino, mahalo. And then you recognize that just some people going to have a very different philosophy. But all you can control is your own. All you can control is your own in that. Yeah, you can only control your response. You can only control your perception of it. You cannot control others. And so maybe it's also taking on that space of demonstrating what cultural values mean and putting into play. Is the other question? Oh, I don't think so. I am not even that. We cannot quantify Hawaiianness. We all have different, not having one. Yeah, exactly. Kalani, you're absolutely right. And I think when people start to try to use that, then I don't know. In my opinion, this is just my opinion. That's not really Kanaka right there. And I think I'm okay in my space in my life to be like, that's not Kanaka. I don't know where you got that from, but sometimes you got to check yourself. But I think if people are saying that, I'd rather them say it to my face than over there talking on the side or being on social media where you don't have to be yourself. You can just be whoever and be over there blasting away. So in a way, Lei, you want people to put it up in front of you because then you know they're ano and you know where they're thinking. And that makes you more aware of the spaces that you occupy.
Yes. Sheri, how do you navigate the balance between respecting Hawaiian traditions and incorporating your own personal identity?
I think I don't think you can have one without the other. I believe that understanding the values that you hold as a Hawaiian is part of your identity, is part of who you are. I often say, people always tell me like, oh, help me have more aloha, help all of this. And the first thing I say is, okay, just to be clear, I cannot create aloha for you. You either have it or you don't. And it's like your values of being Hawaiian, of Hawaiian values. You either have it or you don't. What I can help you understand or help give you manao on is, how do you put that into action? How do you build or expand that of you? If moral, that's not my place to help you go get it. That's your place to go get it and to figure it out. My place is, hey, how do we amplify? How do we make that enhanced? How do we learn the skills to be better at it? But if more to start with, yeah, that's really hard to do. So I think for me, it's being intentional and it's recognizing there are things that I don't know and being okay with that and saying I don't know. I see Kalani on here and I've seen his stuff on social media around genealogy and stuff. And I'm like, oh, wow. And so I recognize there are people that I fan crush and I go, oh my God, they're amazing. I love the work they're doing. That's not my space. Not that I'm not interested in it, but I'm not a great crafter at all. And people who know me know this about me. I am not great with glue guns. I cannot weave to save my life. So if I definitely I was not doing kappa. I was not doing, that is not me. And so I think it's recognizing what I do contribute and bring to the table and what I don't, and recognizing that balance for myself and being intentional, really being intentional. And sometimes I just like blast, and I have to just stop and really think about the implications that my words will have if I did that. If I said this versus that, it's being very intentional, like a konane, like the konane game. It's not about the move in front of you. It is the move that's 3 moves in front of you. It is about anticipating what the other person has or will do or has done. And so sometimes it's almost I think sometimes it looks like you're being not maybe lazy, but I go wait on them. But I go and wait on it is because we're waiting to see what else falls in. It's about timing. It really is about timing. When we all stop and take a look at our lives and we look at things that just move the way it's supposed to move, oftentimes it's because we waited or had to come back a second or third or fourth time because the timing wasn't right. And so I think that's also very cultural and very Kanaka in the thinking that sometimes we got to just pump the brakes a little bit and take a breath and then decide. We're in this environment now that it's that instant gratification, instant everything. And that's not what it is. When you are digging through your genealogy, you're not going to get them on your first look. You're going to have to dig and dig and dig and hit a wall, turn around, dig and dig. Same thing when you're making a lehulu, you're doing lepo'o. If you're not in it, your poor lepo'o gonna look probably like mine, like half oval, all chunky, and then thin, and then it looks like a hot mess. But when you really just pace and you think and you are thoughtful, that's when you get into a rhythm. That's when you watch these weavers, you watch these folks like that, they get in a rhythm. And I think that's the balance, is finding that rhythm, like when you're watching people do lei. Or you watching people weave, it's that rhythm. And that to me is balance of life, is finding that rhythm.
Yes. So Sheri, with us talking about the Hawaiian culture and traditions, how do you envision passing on Hawaiian culture and tradition to the future generations with so many here on the continent? A lot of the olelo is not being passed on, things like that. How do you envision that we can keep the culture and traditions connected to our future generations?
I think that we have some really good folks. Just, I'm sure listening in, you have somebody who's really delved into genealogy and how that practice is passed on. So people can learn how to find what their mo'okuauhau is and their genealogy and where they belong. You have folks lay on here who is practicing the traditions, right? Who is incorporating the youth into that, who is exposing her community on the continent to our community and what that means, and to gain understanding and appreciation around that. So I think there are definitely folks all across the country that are doing that in their own spaces. But I think I think we don't do enough to support, because sometimes people are doing it based on what they know. And that might butt up against some of the traditionalists in terms of the practice that you're doing. But we also got to remember it's really hard to maintain traditional practices when the world around you is not. And so I think that's a whole other conversation I know that you guys have had around kumuhula stuff, right? Like those practices And when not only the life around you is different, but the environment around you, the physical environment is different. Even in Hawaii, right? To practice la'au lapa'au in those things looks very different today than it did 50, 100, or even 10 years ago, because gathering spaces have changed. All of these things have changed and have had impact in the ground in which our la'au grows, right? And so I think we have to recognize that there might be adaptation, but I think it's us being really clear what that means, because if you adapt because your environment is different, you got to call that out. So, for example, I was in Alaska several years ago, and we had done this. We had made, well, we never had luau leaf, but had sweet potato leaves. We never had butterfish, but had salmon. And creating a different laulau, we did. But it was really great to have the conversation, because we recognized the adaptation was because we never have luau leaf, never have there. Hey, we still eat, we still like the flavor, we still like practice putting it, cooking them and doing that. So we knew that there was adaptation. And I think it's recognizing that and being honest about that, not like sneaky about it, but saying that, and these are the things that's also cultural. Innovation. Hawaiians were super innovative. But I think when you are maneuvering in this world, sometimes the traditional way of doing it may not necessarily fit. Not that it's wrong, but I think you got to recognize that there might be some adaptation. And what does that mean? And how does that roll out, and being honest about it? So I think it's encouraging where we can. It's having the real conversations about, okay, are you tokenizing us, or are you truly trying to uplift the information, especially in hula, right? I know you guys had this conversation on a podcast, that what are you doing with our ike and our knowledge? And is it, again, bringing value? And if it's not bringing value, then you got to call out some of these folks, not because it's not helping our people and it's not helping our culture. It's not helping our lahui understand who they are, because it gives them misinformation around that. So I think it's having the conversations, it's showcasing, highlighting those that are trying and doing, and not going to be perfect. And you're going to have the Monday morning quarterbacks on the side giving their 2 cents opinions all the time. That's par for course. But maybe you use that as motivation too, right? Or maybe I got to tweak this a little bit. Maybe I got to educate more around this. Maybe I cannot be just gentle about it. I got to be a hard ass. I think those are spaces.
Yes, I think that is a great conversation on that, because there's often that almost competition between an arguments of the traditionalists and for those
Contemporary.
to adapt, because we see that with a lot of our forms of our traditions and culture, that it's like there's a big difference between appropriating our culture versus utilizing the culture and adapting to what we have available here on the continent, and such that we can't have 100% what we can get on the island, but we're going to still pass on those traditions and things with what we have here. Of course, we're getting towards the end of the night. So how would you, Sheri, how would we put our passion into reality as Hawaiians to really pass on who we are as a people and a culture?
I think that's a loaded question. I think it's gonna be personal choice, personal how they do it. Because some people may feel super comfortable with their ohana, doing that with their ohana, creating that growth within their own family and having that kind of push out. I think other people have the opportunity to do a larger audience, a different type of audience. I think it's going to be a multi-pronged approach. And I think it has to be very thoughtful, intentional. I don't think we can just go shooting from the hip and doing all of that. And But I also think it has to be made personal too. That it cannot just, you have to build connection, and you have to have pilina, and you have to do all of those things. If you think you're going to do it by just your name, and by your name you're going to get all these things done, and it's the who's who, that's, yeah, sure, in one area, but you got to connect. You got to go where our community is at. You got to have conversations. You got to shut your mouth, open your ears, sit, watch, listen, all of those things. I think we don't do that as often. We don't be the fly on the wall and just listen and watch and fill our na'au with all of that kind of stuff. We don't. We're so busy trying to accumulate, and we're so busy in trying to elevate our own selves that we miss those rare opportunities of just sitting and listening and doing. It's really about the hana at the end of the day, right? It's really about the work that you do. And if other people are in your va'a working as well as you, then you guys all benefit, right? We all get to the destination quicker without working so hard. But it is about the work. Growing up, and even I hear it from others, that if we come and we show up at somebody's house, you don't ask them, hey, you need help, auntie. No. You just get in there, you roll up your sleeves, you start washing dishes. You grab the towel, you start drying the plates. You start picking up the rubbish, throwing them away. If you got to ask how you can be of service, yes, there's some spaces you're going to put it out there, let me help be of service. But if you got to ask in your community, you need to self-reflect on that. I think all of those things, I don't think it's one. I don't think there's a silver bullet, Dana, of you do this one thing and that's it. And the other thing that's a reality is it's tiring. It's tiring because the constant need to educate about what it means to be Hawaiian, who I am as a Hawaiian, is exhausting. I think I should just have a recorder. But it's important because part of that is connecting, right? If I look at it as, oh my gosh, here we go again, that's very different than the outcome I want versus, okay, let me tell you about this. Let me share my mana'o around this. We may not agree, but let me put it out there. I think that's also really important.
Sheri, first of all, of course, every time we have on here, you drop nuggets of really getting the thought process going. And for those that are watching this on the replay, definitely take some of this in, still comment, because especially if something this conversation resonated with you, that you want to have a certain topic you would like for us to talk about on the show, please comment on this episode, but also you can email us at Moana Nui podcast is one word at gmail.com. If there's a topic that you want us to dive into, that this conversation inspired within you as we're having these conversations and navigating through the podcast and everything. Moana, do you have any last words before we get ready to wrap up the show?
No, I just wanted to mahalo Sheri for always coming onto the space and having some of these tough conversations. I think it is definitely very important for us to have them. And I think the thing that I take away and encourage everybody to think about how you can do this is to listen. Because I think, especially in today's times, people listen to react, but they're not listening to understand all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important to understand the nuances of the conversations. I can't remember which topic we were talking about, but for me, if I feel like a discussion could be perceived, maybe tick somebody off, I'll always ask for a definite, like, how are you defining this term so that I can respond like in that specific area? Because I think, and I see this even at work, like in even non-Kanaka spaces, that there tends to be a lot of headbutts because we're not using the same definition of the word, right? Yeah. And yeah, so I definitely encourage people to welcome the conversations, right? If somebody doesn't agree with you, Doesn't mean that we got to be cool. It's an opportunity for me. It's an opportunity to learn. I come with my experiences and what I'm exposed to, but I don't know everything because I cannot know everything. So I think if we come with that, it's good as we learn from each other. Mahalo nui. Mahalo to everybody who have engaged in the conversation.
And with that, Sheri, do you have any last words or anywhere they can learn more and follow POL and everything that your organization is doing?
Yeah, definitely papaololokahi.org, our website. We are on social media, Instagram, Twitter, or X, I guess it's called, and Facebook. So yeah, take a look. Also, we have our NHPI covidhawaii.net. You might want to look at that. There's some pretty cool things that our Pacific Islanders are doing with our organization. Yeah.
Awesome. Everyone, we thank you for tuning in tonight. And for those that are watching this on the replay, definitely share this conversation with your fellow Kanakas, both on the continent and on the islands, to keep this conversation going. And of course, as I mentioned before, if there's any topics you want us to discuss that affects the community or connects us as a community, definitely reach out to us so we can have that as a potential topic for upcoming episodes. But once again, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in and have a great evening. And we'll see you on Thursday. Bye, everyone.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will.
If this the land of the free, it was a freedom then. When they annexed Hawaii and called it Cedar Lands, without any type of payment and no signing off. Called themselves the Republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand, yeah.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe. As a part of their ongoing war with Asia, used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. The work of all the locals. School never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will.
So if you put Hawaii in a perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course. Cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe. As a part of their ongoing war with Asia, used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. The work of all the locals. School never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will.